The contract snaps against the marble countertop like a gunshot. Jae-ho Park's hands shake as he stares at the thick document, 27 pages that could transform his grandfather's war-torn recipe into a culinary empire. Across from him, Jasmine Sinclair adjusts her gold-rimmed glasses, her voice steady as stone. Sign this, and we go from community fair to national franchise in 18 months. The conference room falls silent, except for the hum of Atlanta's financial district beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 venture capitalists lean forward in their leather chairs. Jae-ho's immigration attorney nods encouragingly. His work visa expires in 60 days. The equity split is 70-30. Jasmine continues, sliding the pen across the table. You maintain creative control of all recipes. I handle operations, marketing, and investor relations. We start with a ghost kitchen in Buckhead, then expand to— Wait. Jae-ho's voice cuts through her presentation. His eyes fix on Clause 17. Complete recipe transfer upon contract default or partner withdrawal. The same clause that haunts him from Marcus Kim's restaurant, where his grandfather's notebook disappeared into corporate greed. Jasmine's expression doesn't change, but her fingers tighten around her Mont Blanc. Standard protection for intellectual property in food tech ventures. Protection for who? Before she can answer, her phone buzzes. The screen shows a text from an unknown number. Your Korean boy's grandfather stole those recipes from Marcus Kim in 1952. Check the Seoul Tribune archives. This deal is built on lies. Jasmine glances at the message, her face carefully neutral. She sets the phone face down and meets Jae-ho's eyes. The market waits for no one, Mr. Park. Especially not in Atlanta's oversaturated Asian fusion scene. Jae-ho picks up the pen, feeling its weight against his palm. The same weight as his grandfather's wooden ladle, now locked in his studio apartment safe. Everything he's dreamed of sits before him. Legal status, financial security, the chance to honor his family's legacy on American soil. But the text message glows in his peripheral vision, and Jasmine's too perfect composure sends ice through his veins. If I sign this, he says slowly, what happens to my story when it becomes your story? The pen hovers over the signature line as footsteps echo in the hallway outside. Urgent, approaching, stopping just beyond the conference room door. Someone knows the truth about the notebook, and they're here to expose everything. Have you ever held your entire future in your hands, knowing that signing might save you, or destroy the very thing you're trying to protect? If stories like this resonate with you, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what comes next. 3 days earlier, Jae-ho stands in the pre-dawn darkness of Marcus Kim's flagship kitchen, stirring the bone broth that has simmered for 14 hours. The wooden ladle in his hand, smooth from decades of use, stained dark with memory, moves in the same circular pattern his grandfather taught him in the cramped Seoul apartment 20 years ago. Patience, Jae-ho-ya, his grandfather's voice echoes in his mind. Good broth cannot be rushed. Like good life, it needs time to find its soul. The kitchen door slams open. Marcus Kim enters like a storm, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the 5 a.m. hour. He surveys his domain, the spotless stations, the perfectly arranged mise en place, the controlled chaos that generates $3,000 in revenue per night. You're here early again, Marcus observes, approaching the massive stockpot. The broth needs attention every 4 hours. You taught me that. I taught you many things. Marcus dips a clean spoon into the rich golden liquid and tastes it. His expression shifts, not the usual approval, but something harder to read. Surprise. Recognition. Suspicion. This flavor. Where did you learn this specific technique? Jae-ho hesitates. For 2 years, he's worked as Marcus's sous chef, absorbing everything about American restaurant operations while contributing his own quiet innovations. He's never mentioned the notebook, never spoken of his grandfather's legacy. But today, something in Marcus's tone demands honesty. From his jacket pocket, Jae-ho withdraws a small, leather-bound journal. The cover is worn soft, the pages yellowed with age. Korean characters flow across the first page in careful, precise handwriting. My grandfather's recipes. He wrote them during the war, when he cooked for American soldiers in Seoul. Marcus goes very still. The spoon clatters to the counter. Your grandfather's name. Park Myung-ho. He worked at the Arirang restaurant, near Yongsan Garrison. Marcus's voice is barely a whisper. His face has gone pale beneath his perpetual tan. That man died 30 years ago. How do you have this? He was my grandfather. Jae-ho holds the notebook protectively against his chest. He gave me this before he passed. Said it contained the soul of Korean cooking. The bridge between old country and new. For a long moment, the only sound is the gentle bubbling of the broth. Then Marcus straightens, his businessman mask sliding back into place. But his eyes remain fixed on the notebook with an intensity that makes Jae-ho's skin crawl. You're dismissed, Marcus says abruptly, effective immediately. Sir, clear out your station. You're no longer employed by Marcus Kim Enterprises. The words hit like a physical blow. Jae-ho's work visa depends on this job. His rent, his future, his dreams of opening his own restaurant. Everything hinges on this kitchen. Marcus Hyung, please. If I did something wrong, don't call me Hyung. Marcus's voice cuts like a blade. And don't ever bring that notebook into my restaurant again. 30 minutes later, Jae-ho stands on Peachtree Street in the gray dawn, his chef's knives in one hand and his grandfather's notebook in the other. The Atlanta morning is crisp with autumn air, and the first commuters are beginning to fill the sidewalks. He should feel devastated. Instead, he feels something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in 2 years, he doesn't have to hide who he is or where he comes from. He doesn't have to watch Marcus take credit for innovations that spring from his grandfather's wisdom. He doesn't have to pretend that his dreams fit neatly into someone else's vision of Korean cuisine in America. But relief doesn't pay rent, and it doesn't extend work visas. His phone buzzes with a text from his roommate. Dude, there's a community fair at Piedmont Park today. Local vendors, food trucks. Maybe you could set up a booth? Jae-ho looks at the notebook in his hands, then at the gleaming towers of Atlanta's financial district rising before him. Somewhere in this city of ambitious dreams and reinvention, there has to be a place for a Korean immigrant with a grandfather's recipe and nothing left to lose. What he doesn't know is that in exactly 6 hours, a black woman in a navy blazer will stop at his borrowed table, taste his grandfather's broth, and ask the question that will change everything. Piedmont Park buzzes with the controlled chaos of Atlanta's weekend community fair. Local vendors line the walking paths, artists selling handmade jewelry, small business owners hawking artisanal soaps, families sharing homemade treats. Jae-ho sets up his borrowed card table between a woman selling homemade candles and a man demonstrating organic dog food. His equipment is laughably modest. A single camping stove, a stock pot he's carried from his apartment, paper cups from the corner store, and a folding chair that's seen better days. The bone broth simmers quietly, filling the air with rich, complex aromas that seem out of place among the casual weekend atmosphere. What's your story? The candlewoman, Maria, gestures toward his simple setup. You look like you've been cooking for more than a few hours. 14 hours, Jae-ho admits, stirring the broth with his grandfather's ladle. Started it yesterday evening. Traditional Korean bone broth, my grandfather's recipe. Smells incredible. How much? He's calculated the cost down to the penny. Bones from the Korean market in Doraville, vegetables from the Buford Highway Farmers Market, gas for the stove, disposable cups. $3. $3? Maria raises an eyebrow. You could charge twice that in this neighborhood. Before Jae-ho can respond, the first customer approaches, a jogger in expensive running gear who's stopped mid-stride, drawn by the scent. Then a family with 2 small children. Then a group of college students. Word spreads with the efficiency of good gossip. There's a Korean guy by the playground making soup that smells like heaven. By noon, he served 47 cups and has a line 6 people deep. The broth tastes exactly as his grandfather intended, rich without being heavy, complex without being overwhelming, familiar yet surprising. Each customer gets the same careful preparation. The broth ladled with precision, a small paper napkin, a plastic spoon. That's when the rain starts. Atlanta autumn rain doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives in fat, urgent drops that send vendors scrambling to cover their wares. The crowd disperses with the practiced efficiency of people who know better than to fight Georgia weather. Within minutes, the fair transforms from bustling community gathering to soggy ghost town. Jae-ho sits under his single umbrella, protecting the stockpot more than himself. Rain drips from his hair, soaks through his jacket, puddles around his feet. He should pack up, cut his losses, retreat to his studio apartment to plan his next move. Instead, he stays. Something about giving up now feels like betraying not just his dreams, but his grandfather's memory. The footsteps approach through the rain-muffled quiet. Professional shoes, heels, but not too high. Confident stride despite the weather. Jae-ho looks up to see a black woman in a navy blazer, her curly hair pulled back in a neat bun, gold-rimmed glasses fogged with rain. She carries a large umbrella and moves with the purposeful grace of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. "Are you still serving?" she asks, her voice warm despite the professional tone. "If you don't mind getting wet." She positions her umbrella to cover both of them and extends her hand. "Jasmine Sinclair. I was walking back from a client meeting when I smelled," she gestures vaguely at the air, "something that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen." Jae-ho ladles the broth carefully, hands steady despite the cold rain. Jae-ho Park. "And this is my grandfather's bone broth. Recipe from Seoul, 1952. Jasmine accepts the cup, inhaling the steam before taking a careful sip. Her expression changes, not just approval, but something deeper. Recognition. Memory. "Oh." The word comes out like a small prayer. "How much does it cost you to make this?" $2.50 per cup. "How much do you charge?" $3. She takes another sip, closing her eyes. When she opens them again, her gaze is sharper, more focused. "What's your plan?" It's such a simple question, but it cuts straight to the heart of his uncertainty. Jae-ho sets down his ladle, meeting her eyes across the steam rising from the stockpot. "Honestly, I don't have one. I got fired yesterday. My work visa expires in 2 months. This was supposed to be a way to make grocery money, but people keep asking for the story behind the broth, and I keep thinking maybe that matters as much as the flavor." Jasmine nods slowly, rain pattering against her umbrella. "I run a culinary accelerator. We help food entrepreneurs turn their passion into sustainable businesses. I've seen a lot of good ideas, a lot of talented chefs. But what you have here..." She takes another sip. "This isn't just good food. This is food with a soul." The rain intensifies, drumming against the umbrella like impatient fingers. Around them, the empty fair feels like a stage set waiting for the next act. "Can I ask you something?" Jasmine continues. "If you could scale this, I mean really scale it, not just weekend farmers markets, what would that look like to you?" It's the question he's been afraid to ask himself. Jae-ho looks at his grandfather's notebook, now carefully wrapped in plastic to protect it from the rain. "I want to honor his legacy, but I also want to make it my own. Korean food in America doesn't have to be exactly like Korean food in Korea. It can be something new, something that bridges both worlds. That takes capital, business planning, marketing strategy, legal compliance." She pauses, studying his face. "It also takes trust. Are you ready for someone to invest in your dream if it means sharing control?" Before he can answer, her phone buzzes. She glances at the screen, and her expression shifts almost imperceptibly. Professional warmth replaced by something more guarded. "I need to take this, but Jae-ho..." She hands him her business card, the paper crisp despite the damp air. "Call me Monday. Let's talk about turning this into something bigger." As she walks away through the rain, phone pressed to her ear, Jae-ho stares at the card in his hand. Jasmine Sinclair, Managing Director, Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator. Below that, in smaller type, Growing Dreams into Sustainable Realities. He has no idea that the phone call she just took was from Marcus Kim, or that the questions she asked weren't casual curiosity, but the opening moves in a game where the stakes are higher than either of them realizes. Monday morning arrives with the crisp efficiency of Atlanta autumn. Jae-ho stands outside the gleaming glass tower that houses Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator, checking his reflection in the lobby windows. He's wearing his only good shirt, white cotton, carefully pressed, and the black slacks he reserves for job interviews. His grandfather's notebook rests in a leather messenger bag, along with printed copies of his rough business plans sketched out over the weekend. The elevator rises to the 15th floor with mechanical precision. Through the glass doors, he can see the accelerator's open-concept office. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, young professionals in carefully casual attire, typing intensely at standing desks. A reception area showcases framed photographs of successful restaurant launches, farm-to-table cafes, artisanal bakeries, fusion food trucks that have become local legends. Jae-ho Park for Jasmine Sinclair, he tells the receptionist, a woman in her 20s with intricate braids and a warm smile. She's expecting you. Conference room B, down the hall, last door on the right. The conference room overlooks the city's financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame a view of Atlanta's ambitious skyline, where cranes and construction sites speak of constant growth and reinvention. Jasmine sits at a sleek table, her laptop open, several manila folders arranged with military precision. She's changed from Saturday's rain-soaked blazer into a charcoal gray suit that speaks of serious business. "How was your weekend?" she asks as he enters. "Productive. I wrote out some preliminary numbers, researched local health department requirements, looked into commercial kitchen rental rates." He sets his bag carefully on the table. "I also called my immigration attorney. The work visa situation is complex. Most worthwhile things are." Jasmine gestures for him to sit. "Tell me about your grandfather." It's not the question he expected, but he opens the notebook anyway, revealing pages covered in careful Korean script. Park Myung-ho, born in 1920 in Jeolla Province. Moved to Seoul during the war, cooked for American soldiers stationed near Yongsan Garrison. He learned to adapt traditional Korean flavors for Western palates without losing the essence of what made the food special. And Marcus Kim? How does he fit into this story? Jae-ho's hands still on the notebook pages. The question feels loaded, though he can't pinpoint why. Marcus worked at the same restaurant in the 1950s. They were colleagues. I think Marcus learned some techniques from my grandfather, but I don't know the details. My grandfather didn't like to talk about that time. Jasmine nods, making notes on a yellow legal pad. And your vision for bringing this to market? For the next hour, Jae-ho presents everything he's prepared. Cost analysis, target demographics, expansion possibilities. He talks about ghost kitchens and delivery apps, about building a brand around authenticity and family legacy. Jasmine listens intently, asking sharp questions about scalability and profit margins and competitive positioning. "The numbers work," she finally says. "The story is compelling. The food is exceptional." She closes her laptop with a decisive click. "I want to offer you a partnership." "A partnership?" Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator will provide initial capital, $50,000 for equipment, commercial kitchen rental, legal fees, and operating expenses for the first 6 months. In exchange, we take 30% equity in the business. The number hits him like cold water. 30% of his grandfather's legacy, of his dreams, of everything he's worked toward. That's significant. It's industry standard for early-stage food ventures. But here's what makes this different. You maintain complete creative control over all recipes and menu development. I handle business operations, investor relations, and expansion strategy. We're not buying your vision, Jae-ho. We're amplifying it. She slides a document across the table. Not the full contract, but a term sheet outlining the basic structure. The letterhead is elegant, professional, intimidating. Take some time to review this. Have your attorney look it over. But don't take too much time. The market window for Korean comfort food is opening now, especially post-pandemic. In 6 months, we'll be competing with 3 other similar concepts. Jae-ho scans the document, his mind racing. Legal residency pathway through business ownership, professional kitchen facilities, marketing budget, distribution network. Everything he needs to transform his weekend farmer's market booth into a legitimate restaurant business. There's one more thing, Jasmine continues. Marcus Kim called me Saturday evening, after we spoke in the park. The words send ice through Jae-ho's veins. He called you? He wanted to discuss your employment situation. Expressed concerns about intellectual property, the provenance of certain recipes. Her tone remains neutral, but her eyes are watching his reaction carefully. I told him I'd look into it. And I did. The Korean American Chamber of Commerce has archives dating back to the 1950s. Immigration records, business licenses, employment records for Korean nationals working in Seoul during the American military presence. She opens one of the manila folders and withdraws a black and white photograph. Your grandfather, 1952, head chef at the Arirang restaurant. The photograph shows a young man in a white coat standing proudly beside a massive stock pot. The resemblance to Jae-ho is unmistakable. The same determined eyes, the same careful attention to detail. But more importantly, the same wooden ladle rests in his hands. Marcus Kim started as a dishwasher at that restaurant in 1953, Jasmine continues. According to the records, he worked there for 2 years before immigrating to America. Your grandfather stayed in Korea until 1960. So Marcus learned from my grandfather, not the other way around. That's what the evidence suggests. She closes the folder. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Before Jae-ho can answer, his phone buzzes. A text message from an unknown number. Meet me at Ponce City Market, food court, 6 p.m. tonight. Come alone. We need to talk about your grandfather's notebook. A friend. The partnership offer sits before him, promising everything he's dreamed of. But someone else knows about the notebook's history, and they're not interested in business meetings or legal documents. Ponce City Market hums with Monday evening energy. The converted Sears building now houses Atlanta's most eclectic food hall, where Korean tacos compete with Ethiopian coffee and artisanal donuts. Jae-ho arrives 10 minutes early, claiming a small table near the center of the space where he can watch all entrances. His phone shows 6:03 p.m. when she approaches. A Korean woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in a neat chignon, wearing a simple black coat that speaks of understated elegance. She carries herself with the careful dignity of someone who has navigated decades of being foreign in America, and her eyes hold a sharpness that reminds him unexpectedly of his grandfather. You must be Park Jae-ho, she says in Korean, settling into the chair across from him without invitation. I am. And you are? Someone who knew your grandfather very well. She switches to English, her accent minimal but precise. My name is Lee Soonja. I worked at the Arirang restaurant from 1951 to 1957. I was there when your grandfather developed those recipes you carry in your notebook. Jae-ho's pulse quickens. You knew Harabaoji? I loved your grandfather. The words come out simple, direct, loaded with decades of unspoken history. We planned to marry before the circumstances changed, before Marcus Kim made his accusations. What accusations? Soonja reaches into her purse and withdraws a manila envelope, worn soft with age. Your grandfather never told you the full story of why he remained in Korea when so many others immigrated to America. He said the opportunities weren't right. That he wanted to rebuild Seoul's restaurant scene rather than start over in a foreign country. That's partially true. She opens the envelope and spreads several documents across the small table. Employment records, immigration applications, newspaper clippings in both Korean and English. But the real reason was Marcus Kim's allegation that your grandfather had stolen recipes from the restaurant owner and planned to use them to open competing establishments in America. The words hit like physical blows. Jae-ho stares at the documents, trying to make sense of the careful Korean script, the official seals, the bureaucratic language of immigration denial. The allegation was false, Soon-ja continues. Your grandfather created those recipes. I watched him develop them, test them, refine them over months of careful work. But Marcus was persuasive, and he had allies among the Korean business community in Seoul. When your grandfather's immigration application was denied, Marcus received approval within 6 months. Why are you telling me this now? Because Marcus Kim has built a reputation and a business empire on recipes that belong to your family. And because yesterday, I received a phone call from someone representing his interests, asking questions about you, your employment status, and that notebook you carry. Jae-ho feels the blood drain from his face. Who called you? Someone who claimed to be conducting due diligence on a potential business partnership. They wanted to know if I could verify the authenticity of certain recipes, the legitimate ownership of intellectual property. Soon-ja's smile is thin and bitter. Apparently, Marcus is concerned that your grandfather's legacy might interfere with his own business interests. The food court noise fades into background static. Jae-ho thinks about Jasmine's partnership offer, about Marcus's phone call to her, about the too convenient timing of this meeting. Are you saying that Marcus is trying to sabotage my business before it starts? I'm saying that Marcus Kim has spent 70 years building a narrative where he is the innovative genius who brought authentic Korean flavors to American palates. Your existence, and the existence of that notebook, threatens that narrative. She gathers the documents back into the envelope. The question is, what are you prepared to do about it? Before Jae-ho can answer, his phone buzzes with a text from Jasmine. Need to move up our timeline. Can you meet tomorrow morning, 8 a.m.? Urgent business considerations have arisen. Soon-ja notices his expression. You've already been contacted, haven't you? By someone offering to help you turn your grandfather's recipes into a business? Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator. The managing director tasted my broth at a community fair, offered me a partnership. How convenient. Soon-ja's tone is dry as autumn leaves. And what did she tell you about Marcus Kim's interest in your activities? That he called her with concerns about intellectual property. That she looked into it and found evidence supporting my grandfather's version of events. Did she show you this evidence? Jae-ho hesitates. A photograph. Employment records from the Korean American Chamber of Commerce, which could be easily fabricated by someone with sufficient motivation and resources. Soon-ja stands, her movements precise despite her age. I'm not telling you not to pursue your dreams, Jae-ho. Your grandfather would want you to succeed. But be very careful about who you trust with his legacy. She hands him the envelope. These are copies of the original documents from 1952. Immigration records, employment histories, witness statements from other restaurant workers. The evidence that your grandfather tried to present in his own defense, and that was ignored because Marcus Kim had better connections. Why do you still have these? Because I never stopped believing that someday, someone would need to know the truth. Her eyes soften slightly. Your grandfather wrote to me for 30 years after I immigrated to America. He never married, you know. He said he was waiting for justice, waiting for the right moment to clear his name. And now that moment might have arrived, but only if you're brave enough to face the consequences of telling the truth. As Soon-ja walks away through the evening crowd, Jae-ho stares at the envelope in his hands. Inside are documents that could validate his grandfather's legacy, or destroy his chances of building a business in America. Tomorrow morning, he'll sit across from Jasmine Sinclair and make a decision that will determine not just his future, but how his grandfather's story is remembered. What he doesn't know is that at this very moment, Marcus Kim is sitting in his restaurant's private dining room, reviewing surveillance photos from Ponce City Market and planning his next move. Tuesday morning arrives gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Jae-ho sits in his studio apartment, the envelope from Soon-ja spread across his small kitchen table alongside Jasmine's partnership agreement. Two versions of his future, one built on evidence and justice, the other on pragmatic opportunity and calculated risk. The documents Soonja provided paint a devastating picture. Employment records showing his grandfather as head chef from 1951 to 1954. Immigration applications denied due to concerns about intellectual property theft, filed by Marcus Kim. Witness statements from other Korean workers describing how Marcus systematically claimed credit for his grandfather's innovations. Most damning of all, a copy of a letter his grandfather wrote to the U.S. Immigration Office in 1955, detailing exactly how Marcus had stolen not just recipes, but the entire culinary philosophy that would later make him famous in America. The letter was never answered. Jae-ho's phone shows 7:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, he needs to be at Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator, ready to make a decision that will determine whether he becomes a partner in his own success or a pawn in someone else's game. The rain starts as he walks the 6 blocks to the office building. By the time he reaches the lobby, his jacket is soaked and his carefully pressed shirt is showing wrinkles. But the documents in his messenger bag remain dry, protected by layers of plastic and determination. Jasmine is waiting in the same conference room, but the atmosphere has changed. Her laptop is closed. The partnership agreement has been joined by additional documents, legal papers, incorporation forms, what appears to be a background check report. She looks up as he enters, her expression unreadable. "You look like you didn't sleep well," she observes. "I had a lot to think about." Jae-ho takes his seat, setting his bag carefully on the floor. "About the partnership, about my grandfather's legacy, about what it means to build something authentic in America." "And what conclusions did you reach?" "That authenticity requires honesty, even when honesty is complicated." He withdraws Soonja's envelope and places it on the table between them. "I learned some things yesterday about the history between my grandfather and Marcus Kim. Things that change the context of our discussion." Jasmine glances at the envelope but doesn't touch it. "What kind of things?" "The kind that suggest Marcus Kim built his reputation on recipes that belonged to my grandfather. The kind that explain why a successful restaurateur would be concerned about a small-time immigrant with a notebook full of family recipes." For a long moment, the only sound is rain against the conference room windows. Then Jasmine opens her laptop and turns the screen toward him. The email displayed is from Marcus Kim, sent at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. "Ms. Sinclair, I've reviewed the materials you requested regarding Park Jae-ho and his claimed family recipes. I'm prepared to offer substantial evidence that these recipes were developed collaboratively at the Arirang restaurant, and that exclusive ownership claims are legally questionable. More importantly, I'm prepared to offer Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator a much more lucrative partnership if you help me resolve this matter quietly and professionally. The Korean-American culinary community is small, and reputations matter. Please consider carefully before proceeding. Marcus Kim. He sent this after my meeting with Soonja, Jae-ho says quietly. You know Soonja Lee? She knew my grandfather, worked at the same restaurant. She has documentation that contradicts everything Marcus claims. Jasmine closes the laptop and leans back in her chair. Jae-ho, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you prepared for a legal battle? Because that's what this becomes if we move forward with your partnership, and Marcus decides to challenge the intellectual property claims. What are you saying? I'm saying that Marcus Kim has resources, connections, and 70 years of established reputation in this industry. He can afford to tie us up in court for months, maybe years. He can influence other investors, damage our credibility with restaurant partners, make it very difficult for a small business to succeed. The words hang in the air like smoke. Jae-ho thinks about his work visa, about his savings account with its slowly dwindling balance, about the practical realities of fighting a war against someone who holds all the advantages. On the other hand, Jasmine continues, if we can come to some sort of accommodation with Marcus, then we can focus on building your business without legal distractions. Maybe we call it Korean comfort food inspired by traditional family recipes, instead of claiming direct lineage. Maybe we acknowledge the collaborative nature of Korean culinary traditions in America. Maybe we let him win. Maybe we choose our battles strategically. Jae-ho opens Soon-ja's envelope and spreads the documents across the table. Immigration records, employment histories, witness statements, his grandfather's desperate letter to immigration officials. 70 years of injustice laid out in black and white. My grandfather spent 30 years believing that someday, someone would care enough about the truth to fight for it. He never remarried, never had children of his own, because he was waiting for justice that never came. And you want to be the one who finally gets him that justice. I want to be the one who doesn't let Marcus Kim steal from my family again. Jasmine studies the documents, her expression thoughtful. These are compelling. If they're authentic, they could seriously damage Marcus's reputation. But authenticity would need to be verified, and that takes time and money we don't have. So what are you recommending? I'm recommending that you decide what matters more to you. Justice for your grandfather, or success for yourself. Because in this situation, you probably can't have both. Outside the conference room windows, the rain intensifies, turning the Atlanta morning into a watercolor blur of gray and ambition. Jae-ho looks at his grandfather's photograph, at the young man holding the same wooden ladle that now sits in his apartment, at the determined eyes that mirror his own. The decision he makes in the next 5 minutes will determine not just his business partnership, but whether his grandfather's story ends in vindication or remains buried under 70 years of successful lies. Jae-ho stares at the documents for 30 seconds that feel like 30 minutes. Then he carefully returns them to the envelope and meets Jasmine's eyes across the conference table. What if there's a third option? I'm listening. What if we use the truth as leverage instead of hiding from it? He leans forward, his voice gaining confidence. Marcus Kim is offering you a lucrative partnership to make this go away quietly. But what he's really offering you is hush money. That means he knows these documents are authentic, and he knows they could destroy his reputation if they became public. Jasmine raises an eyebrow. You're suggesting we threaten him? I'm suggesting we negotiate from a position of strength instead of fear. Jae-ho opens his laptop and turns it toward her. The screen shows a news article from Atlanta magazine. Korean Culinary Revolution: How Traditional Flavors Are Reshaping Southern Food Scene. The media loves stories about authentic immigrant cuisine. They especially love stories about cultural heritage being preserved against corporate appropriation. That's a dangerous game, Jae-ho. It's a fair game. Marcus built his empire on my grandfather's innovations. Now he wants to prevent me from building my own business using the same innovations he stole. That's not just legally questionable, it's morally indefensible. Jasmine is quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. What exactly are you proposing? A different kind of partnership agreement. We move forward with the original terms. You provide capital and business expertise. I maintain creative control over recipes and menu development. But we also include a provision for full transparency about the historical origins of the recipes we're using. Meaning we tell my grandfather's story as part of our marketing strategy. Korean comfort food developed by Park Myung-ho in 1952, brought to America by his grandson. We make authenticity our competitive advantage instead of our vulnerability. And if Marcus objects, then we invite him to present his evidence in the court of public opinion. Korean American community, food media, social media. Let people decide who's telling the truth. Jasmine pulls up Marcus's email on her laptop screen. He's not going to back down easily. Korean American culinary community is small, and he has a lot of influence. But influence built on lies doesn't last forever. Jae-ho withdraws his phone and shows her a series of Instagram posts. I spent this morning researching Marcus's restaurants on social media. Look at the reviews from Korean customers, especially older immigrants. The posts tell a revealing story. Mixed reviews praising the food quality but questioning the authenticity. Comments in Korean expressing disappointment that the flavors don't match childhood memories. Complaints about prices that seem to exploit cultural nostalgia without delivering genuine emotional connection. He's been coasting on reputation for years, Jae-ho continues. But reputation based on appropriation is fragile. One well-documented challenge to his narrative, and the whole structure starts to crumble. Jasmine closes the laptop and leans back in her chair. You realize this approach requires us to essentially declare war on one of the most successful Korean-American restaurateurs in the Southeast. I realize this approach requires us to tell the truth and let the consequences follow naturally. The consequences could include legal action, media attacks, difficulty securing additional funding, problems with vendors and suppliers who don't want to take sides in a public dispute. The consequences could also include building a business based on authentic values instead of comfortable compromises, creating a legacy that honors my grandfather instead of enabling the people who robbed him. For the first time since he arrived, Jasmine smiles. You sound like your grandfather. According to these documents, he refused several opportunities to settle quietly with Marcus Kim. Said he'd rather fight and lose than compromise and win. And look how that turned out for him. It turned out with his grandson sitting in a conference room in Atlanta, holding evidence that could finally clear his name and holding a business opportunity that could finally fulfill his dreams. She opens a new document on her laptop. Let me draft a revised partnership agreement. Same financial terms, same operational structure, but with full disclosure provisions and a commitment to transparent storytelling about recipe origins. You're willing to take this risk? I'm willing to bet that authenticity beats appropriation in the long run, especially when the authentic story is as compelling as yours. She pauses, fingers hovering over the keyboard. But I need to know that you're prepared for whatever Marcus Kim throws at us. Legal challenges, public relations battles, industry pressure. This gets ugly before it gets better. Jae-ho thinks about his grandfather's letter to immigration officials, dismissed and ignored for 70 years. About Soon-ja Lee, carrying documentation of injustice across decades of silence. About the wooden ladle sitting in his apartment, waiting to tell its story to anyone brave enough to listen. My grandfather spent 30 years hoping someone would care enough about the truth to fight for it. I'm not going to be the person who finally had the chance and walked away. Then we have a partnership. Jasmine extends her hand across the conference table. Equal partners in telling the truth, whatever the cost. As they shake hands, Jae-ho's phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. Stop what you're doing, or I'll make sure your work visa gets reviewed for immigration fraud. You have 24 hours. MK. The battle for his grandfather's legacy has begun, and Marcus Kim is playing for keeps. The text message changes everything. Jae-ho stares at his phone screen, the threat clear and immediate. Immigration fraud accusations could destroy not just his business prospects, but his entire future in America. His work visa, his legal status, his ability to remain in the country, all of it hangs on bureaucratic approval that can be challenged by anyone with sufficient influence and determination. Show me, Jasmine says, recognizing his expression. He slides the phone across the table. She reads the message twice, her face growing harder with each word. Empty threat, she says finally. Immigration fraud requires evidence of deception in visa applications or employment documentation. You've been completely honest about your status and employment history, but investigations take months, during which time my visa could be suspended, my ability to work restricted, my entire life put on hold while bureaucrats sort through accusations that Marcus Kim probably has lawyers prepared to substantiate. You're scared. I'm realistic. Marcus Kim has resources, connections, and 70 years of experience manipulating systems to get what he wants. I have a notebook and good intentions. Jasmine closes her laptop and stands up, walking to the conference room windows. Rain streaks the glass, turning the Atlanta skyline into an impressionist painting of gray ambition and blurred opportunities. Let me tell you something about bullies, she says without turning around. They escalate quickly because they're counting on you to back down before they have to prove their threats are real. That text message isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of panic. How so? Think about it. Yesterday, Marcus sent me a professional email offering lucrative partnership opportunities. Today he's sending anonymous threats to your personal phone. That's not the behavior of someone who's confident in his legal position. That's the behavior of someone who knows he's vulnerable and is trying to end this fight before it really begins. She turns back to face him. The question is, are you going to let fear determine your response to intimidation, or are you going to use his panic as confirmation that we're on the right track? Before Jae-ho can answer, her phone rings. She glances at the caller ID and frowns. Unknown number. I'm going to take this. She answers with professional neutrality. Jasmine Sinclair. The conversation is brief, mostly Jasmine listening with increasingly sharp attention. I see. And you're calling me because… Yes, I understand your position. No, I don't think that's necessary. I'll consider it and get back to you. She hangs up and looks at Jae-ho with something between admiration and concern. That was Marcus Kim's attorney. Apparently, your anonymous tip yesterday evening to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about stolen recipe allegations has prompted them to consider an investigative piece on cultural appropriation in Korean-American restaurants. I didn't contact any newspaper. I know you didn't, but someone did, using your name and claiming to have documentation supporting allegations against Marcus Kim Enterprises. She sits back down, her expression thoughtful. Someone is stirring this pot very deliberately. The question is who and why. Jae-ho's mind races through possibilities. Soon-ja. She's been waiting 70 years for someone to listen to this story. Maybe she decided to force the issue. Maybe. Or maybe Marcus Kim is creating false evidence of harassment to strengthen his position if this becomes a legal battle. Jasmine reopens her laptop and begins typing quickly. Either way, we need to get ahead of this. If there's going to be media attention, we need to control the narrative. What do you mean? I mean, we tell your story before someone else tells it for us. We make the evidence public. We provide proper documentation. We frame this as a story about justice and family legacy rather than corporate disputes and ethnic politics. She turns the screen toward him. I'm sending you the contact information for Maria Santos, food writer for Atlanta Magazine. She's been covering the Korean-American culinary scene for 5 years. She has a reputation for thorough research and fair reporting, and she's already expressed interest in stories about immigrant food traditions. You want me to call a reporter? I want you to call a storyteller, someone who can help the public understand what's really at stake here. Jasmine slides a notepad across the table. Write down everything you remember about your grandfather's experiences at the Ararang restaurant. Every detail Soon-ja shared with you, every document you've seen, every reason you believe those recipes belong to your family legacy. And then, we let the truth speak for itself. If Marcus Kim wants to fight a public relations battle, he's about to discover that authentic stories resonate more powerfully than corporate spin. Jae-ho picks up the pen, thinking about his grandfather's careful handwriting in the recipe notebook, about Soon-ja's decades of preserved documentation, about the wooden ladle that has stirred both soup and memory across 2 generations. There's something else, he says. Something I haven't told you about the notebook. What? It's not just recipes. My grandfather wrote personal notes in the margins, stories about individual dishes, memories of the people he cooked for, observations about adapting Korean flavors for American tastes. It's like a culinary autobiography. Jasmine leans forward. How detailed? Very. He documented specific conversations with Marcus Kim, recorded exactly which recipes Marcus showed interest in, noted when dishes he created started appearing on other menus around Seoul. Jae-ho opens his bag and withdraws the notebook, handling it with careful reverence. If someone wanted to verify the authenticity of his claims, this provides a day-by-day record of the creative process. That's not just evidence. That's irrefutable proof. Marcus Kim can't claim collaborative development if your grandfather documented the entire innovation process in real time. As if summoned by their conversation, Jae-ho's phone buzzes again. This time, the text is from a local number. Mr. Park, this is Maria Santos from Atlanta Magazine. I understand you have a story about Korean culinary traditions that might interest our readers. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon? Someone has already started the media conversation, and there's no turning back now. Maria Santos meets them at a small cafe in Virginia Highland, a neighborhood where Korean immigrants and young professionals share sidewalks lined with dogwood trees and artisanal coffee shops. She's younger than Jae-ho expected, maybe 30, with curly black hair and the kind of intense focus that suggests she's built her career on stories that matter. "I appreciate you reaching out," she says, as they settle into a corner booth. The Korean-American culinary scene in Atlanta is incredibly rich, but most of the stories that get told focus on success and assimilation. I'm more interested in the complicated histories that success sometimes obscures. Jae-ho glances at Jasmine, who nods encouragingly. "What did you mean when you said someone had contacted you about my story?" "Someone claiming to represent your business interests called yesterday evening, suggesting that I investigate allegations of recipe theft involving Marcus Kim Enterprises. They mentioned documentation dating back to the 1950s. Maria opens a digital recorder and sets it on the table between them. But when I tried to call back for more details, the number was disconnected. "We don't have any representatives," Jasmine says carefully. "This is the first media contact we've initiated." "Interesting. So someone else wants this story told, even if you're not ready to tell it." Maria studies Jae-ho's face, which suggests that whatever you're carrying in that notebook is significant enough that other people are willing to take risks to bring it to light. For the next 2 hours, Jae-ho tells his grandfather's story. He begins with the Arirang restaurant in 1951, describes the relationship between Park Myung-ho and the young Marcus Kim, explains how traditional Korean flavors were adapted for American soldiers far from home. He talks about immigration applications and denied visas, about accusations of theft and collaborative innovation, about a notebook that documented not just recipes, but the entire creative process that would later make Marcus Kim famous. Maria takes careful notes, asking for specific dates, requesting clarification on Korean culinary terms, following up on details that don't quite align with Marcus Kim's published interviews about his early career in Seoul. "Can you show me the notebook?" she asks finally. Jae-ho hesitates. The notebook is fragile, irreplaceable, the only physical link to his grandfather's legacy. But Maria handles it with the reverence it deserves, photographing specific pages with gentle precision, reading Korean text with surprising fluency. "My grandmother was Korean," she explains, noticing his surprise. "I grew up hearing stories about the immigrant experience in the 1950s, the challenges of building authentic businesses while adapting to American expectations." She points to a specific entry dated March 15, 1953. This describes a conversation with Marcus Kim about modifying kimchi fermentation for American palates. Your grandfather notes that Marcus wanted to reduce fermentation time and increase sweetness to appeal to soldiers who found traditional kimchi too pungent. "That's exactly the technique Marcus Kim claims he developed independently," Jasmine says. "The technique that made him famous when he opened his first restaurant in America." "And here," Maria continues, flipping through the notebook, March 22, 1953. "Your grandfather writes about Marcus expressing interest in starting a restaurant in America, asking permission to use modified versions of the recipes they'd developed together. Permission that was apparently granted," Jae-ho says. "My grandfather never objected to sharing Korean culinary traditions. What he objected to was being erased from the story." Maria closes the notebook and leans back in her chair. This is compelling documentation. But Marcus Kim has built a 70-year reputation as an innovative chef who successfully brought Korean flavors to American palates. Challenging that narrative requires more than personal testimony and family archives. What would you need to verify the story? Independent corroboration. Other witnesses who worked at the Arirang restaurant. Immigration records that confirm your grandfather's version of events. Evidence that Marcus Kim's public statements about his culinary development don't match the historical record. "I might be able to help with that," a voice says behind them. They turn to see Soon-ja Lee approaching their table, elegantly dressed in a navy coat, carrying a leather briefcase that looks like it's survived several decades of careful use. "Mrs. Lee." Jae-ho stands. "How did you—" "I've been watching this cafe for an hour, waiting to see if you would have the courage to tell your grandfather's story publicly." She nods politely to Maria and Jasmine. "I believe you need corroboration for your investigation?" She opens the briefcase and withdraws a manila folder thick with documents. Employment records for everyone who worked at the Arirang restaurant from 1951 to 1955. Immigration applications, both approved and denied. Witness statements from 3 other Korean cooks who worked alongside Park Myung-ho and Marcus Kim. Maria's eyes widen as she examines the documents. These are original bureaucratic records. How do you have access to these? I worked for the Korean American Chamber of Commerce for 35 years before I retired. I've been collecting documentation of this story since 1955, waiting for someone to be ready to tell it properly. Soonja sits down at their table uninvited, her presence commanding immediate respect. I also have something else that might interest you. She withdraws a small tape recorder, the kind used for dictation in the 1980s. Recorded interviews with Park Myung-ho, conducted between 1975 and 1980. He wanted to document his experiences for future generations, in case the truth ever became important. You have recordings of Jae-ho's grandfather? I have his voice, telling this story in his own words, with specific details about his work with Marcus Kim and exact descriptions of how the recipes were developed. Soonja's smile is thin but satisfied. I also have Marcus Kim's voice, from a recorded phone call in 1978, where he admitted that many of his signature dishes were based on techniques he learned from Park Myung-ho in Seoul. The table falls silent. Maria stares at the tape recorder like it contains nuclear material. Why now? Jasmine asks. Why wait until this moment to reveal this evidence? Because until now, there was no one prepared to fight for Park Myung-ho's legacy. His grandson was still building his own identity, still learning to balance Korean tradition with American opportunity. Soonja looks directly at Jae-ho. But yesterday, when you chose truth over compromise, you proved you were ready to honor your grandfather's memory properly. The evidence spread across the cafe table represents 70 years of hidden history, and Maria Santos now holds the key to rewriting the story of Korean-American culinary success in the South. The Atlanta magazine article publishes 3 days later with the headline, "The Recipe Thief: How a Korean-American Success Story Was Built on Stolen Dreams." Maria Santos has crafted a meticulous piece of investigative journalism, weaving together documentary evidence, recorded interviews, and expert analysis to tell the story of Park Myung-ho and Marcus Kim with devastating clarity. By noon, the story has been picked up by Food and Wine, Eater, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. By evening, it's trending on social media with hashtags like Stolen Recipes and Korean Cultural Appropriation. Korean-American chefs across the country begin sharing their own stories of cultural erasure and recipe theft. Jae-ho sits in his studio apartment, watching the internet explode with reactions to his grandfather's story. His phone hasn't stopped buzzing with calls from reporters, business inquiries, and messages of support from the Korean-American community. The wooden ladle sits on his kitchen counter next to his laptop, a tangible reminder that sometimes justice arrives 70 years late, but arrives nonetheless. "How are you handling this?" Jasmine asks when she calls at 8 o'clock. "I feel like I'm watching someone else's life," he admits. "This morning I was an unemployed chef with a notebook. Tonight I'm the face of a cultural reckoning in Korean-American restaurants. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I start building the business my grandfather never got to build." The next morning brings both opportunity and backlash. Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator's phone rings constantly with partnership inquiries from investors who want to capitalize on the media attention. But Marcus Kim's response is swift and calculated. By 10 a.m., 3 Korean-American restaurant associations have issued statements questioning the rush to judgment based on unverified historical claims. By noon, Marcus's legal team has filed a defamation lawsuit against Atlanta Magazine, Jae-ho, and Southern Roots Culinary Accelerator. The lawsuit arrives by courier at 2:47 p.m., a thick envelope that transforms Jae-ho's moment of triumph into a nightmare of legal complexity. Jasmine spreads the documents across her conference table like a battle plan, her expression grim as she reads through the allegations. Defamation, business interference, conspiracy to damage reputation, she summarizes. They're seeking $5 million in damages plus injunctive relief to prevent us from using any recipes they claim as Marcus Kim intellectual property. Can they do that? They can try. More importantly, they can tie us up in court for years while we burn through legal fees and media attention moves onto other stories. She looks up from the papers. This is exactly what I warned you about. Marcus Kim has the resources to make this fight cost more than winning is worth. Jae-ho's immigration attorney, David Chen, arrives within an hour. He's a slight man in his 50s who speaks with the careful precision of someone who has navigated decades of bureaucratic warfare on behalf of people whose dreams hang in legal limbo. The timing is significant, he says after reviewing the lawsuit. Your work visa renewal application is currently under review. A high-profile legal dispute alleging fraudulent business practices could prompt immigration officials to take a much closer look at your status. Meaning? Meaning they could deny your renewal pending resolution of the lawsuit, which could take years. The words hit like physical blows. Jae-ho thinks about the community fair, about the people who lined up in the rain to taste his grandfather's broth, about the notebook full of recipes that has waited 70 years to tell its story properly. What if we settle? He asks quietly. On what terms? Jasmine challenges. Marcus Kim doesn't want money. He wants silence. Any settlement that makes this lawsuit go away also makes your grandfather's story disappear. But if I get deported, then Marcus Kim wins completely. Your grandfather's legacy gets buried for another 70 years, and the Korean-American culinary community learns that speaking truth about cultural appropriation leads to legal destruction. David Chen clears his throat diplomatically. There might be another option. The evidence you've presented, the notebook, the recorded interviews, the documentation Mrs. Lee provided, is compelling enough that several civil rights organizations have expressed interest in supporting your case. What kind of support? Legal representation, financial assistance for litigation costs, media advocacy to ensure this story doesn't get buried under corporate legal pressure. He withdraws a business card from his briefcase. The Korean American Coalition for Justice has handled several high-profile cases involving cultural appropriation and business practices. They're prepared to take this case pro bono if you're willing to let it become a test case for broader issues in immigrant business rights. The room falls silent except for the hum of Atlanta traffic 15 floors below. Jae-ho stares out the window at the city where his grandfather's recipes have simmered in restaurant kitchens for decades, uncredited and unacknowledged. What does that mean for the business? It means we fight, Jasmine says. We use every resource available to prove your grandfather's story is true. We build the restaurant business while the legal battle plays out, and we trust that authenticity ultimately defeats appropriation. And if we lose, then we lose fighting for something that matters instead of surrendering to something that's profitable. Before Jae-ho can respond, his phone rings. The caller ID shows Soon-ja Lee. He answers on speakerphone. Turn on channel 11, she says without preamble. Marcus Kim is giving a press conference. They crowd around Jasmine's laptop, pulling up the local news stream. Marcus Kim stands behind a podium in his restaurant's private dining room, flanked by 2 attorneys and backed by photographs of his successful restaurants spanning 5 decades. The allegations against me are baseless and hurtful, he begins, his voice carrying the weight of wounded dignity. I have spent my entire career bringing Korean culinary traditions to American palates with respect and authenticity. Park Myung-ho was a colleague, and I believed, a friend. But these claims about stolen recipes are fabrications designed to damage my reputation and my business. He pauses, letting the camera capture his expression of sorrowful disappointment. I knew Park Myung-ho well. We worked together briefly in Seoul in the 1950s. He was a talented cook, but he was also troubled by gambling debts and personal problems that affected his work. When I succeeded in immigrating to America and he didn't, he apparently harbored resentments that have now been weaponized by people who want to profit from ethnic division. The press conference continues for 20 minutes, with Marcus providing his version of events, presenting character witnesses, and positioning himself as the victim of a coordinated attack by opportunistic accusers. As the camera lingers on Marcus's face, the picture of wounded innocence, Jae-ho realizes that his grandfather's story has become a war where truth and lies compete on equal footing, and victory goes to whoever can manipulate public opinion most effectively. The response to Marcus Kim's press conference is immediate and divided. Korean American community leaders in Atlanta find themselves choosing sides in a dispute that cuts to the heart of identity, success, and cultural authenticity. Some defend Marcus as a pioneer who opened doors for Korean businesses in the American South. Others rally behind Jae-ho as a voice for historical truth and family justice. Elena Vasquez, Jasmine's assistant, arrives at the office early Monday morning with a stack of printed social media posts, local news coverage, and community newsletter articles. The story has evolved beyond simple recipe theft into a broader conversation about power, privilege, and who gets to tell the story of immigrant success in America. The community is split about 60-40 in your favor, she reports to Jae-ho. But the 40% includes some very influential voices. The Korean American Chamber of Commerce issued a statement calling for measured consideration of unproven allegations against established community leaders. Translation? Jasmine asks. Translation. They're scared that challenging Marcus Kim will damage the reputation of Korean businesses generally. Better to sacrifice one family's story than risk broader economic consequences. Jae-ho reads through the social media posts, watching his grandfather's legacy become a political football, kicked around by people who never knew Park Myung-ho's quiet dignity or witnessed his patient hope for eventual justice. But there are allies emerging from unexpected places. The Latino community around Buford Highway, immigrants who understand the pain of cultural erasure, begins sharing the story in Spanish-language media. African American chefs who have faced similar issues with recipe appropriation and cultural theft express solidarity on food blogs and cooking shows. Most surprisingly, younger Korean American chefs start speaking out with their own stories of working for established Korean restaurants, where their innovations were credited to older, more famous chefs. The Saush Credit the Cook hashtag begins trending, with dozens of stories about culinary exploitation within the Korean American restaurant industry. This has become bigger than your grandfather's story, Elena observes. It's become a reckoning with how success gets measured and credited in immigrant communities. That afternoon, Soon-ja Lee calls with unexpected news. I've been contacted by 3 other Korean cooks who worked at restaurants in Seoul during the 1950s, she tells Jae-ho. They have their own stories about Marcus Kim. Stories about recipes he claimed to develop after learning them from other cooks. Are they willing to go public? 2 of them are. One is too old and fragile for the stress of legal proceedings, but the other 2 are prepared to provide sworn statements supporting your grandfather's account. The additional witnesses provide crucial corroboration, but they also escalate the stakes. What began as a dispute between Jae-ho and Marcus Kim has become a systematic challenge to the narrative of Marcus's entire career. We need to be strategic about how we present this, Jasmine warns. If we're not careful, this becomes a witch hunt that discredits legitimate Korean American success stories along with the fraudulent ones. That evening, Jae-ho finds himself in an unexpected place. The kitchen of a small Korean restaurant in Doraville, cooking alongside Maria Kim, no relation to Marcus, a 70-year-old woman who has run the same family restaurant for 43 years. Your grandfather was right to document everything, she tells him as they prepare kimchi together. In Korea, recipes belong to families, to communities. In America, recipes belong to whoever has the best lawyer. Did you ever meet my grandfather? No. But I met many men like him. Men who brought their family knowledge to America and watched other people get rich from it. She tastes the kimchi and adds more gochugaru. The difference is, your grandfather left you proof. Most of us just have memories. As they work side by side, Jae-ho feels connected to something larger than his individual struggle for justice. This kitchen, with its worn cutting boards and seasoned woks, represents the authentic Korean-American culinary tradition that exists parallel to the glossy restaurant empire Marcus Kim has built. What would you do? He asks Maria. If you were in my position, I would cook, she says simply. I would make the food my grandfather taught me to make, and I would let people taste the difference between authentic and appropriated. Food doesn't lie, even when people do. Her words echo in his mind as he drives back to his apartment. Maybe the best response to Marcus Kim's legal warfare isn't counter-litigation, but demonstration. Maybe the most powerful argument for his grandfather's legacy is the food itself. 2 weeks later, Jae-ho stands in the kitchen of Mercy Community Church in East Atlanta, preparing for the most important service of his life. The church has donated their commercial kitchen and fellowship hall for what they're calling a community healing dinner, a chance for people to taste Park Myung-ho's recipes while learning the true story behind them. The menu is simple but deliberate. Bone broth prepared according to his grandfather's notebook, kimchi made from the 1952 recipe that Marcus Kim later modified and claimed as his innovation, bulgogi seasoned with the spice blend that appears in both Park Myung-ho's handwritten notes and Marcus Kim's signature dish. Jasmine coordinates the logistics with military precision. Elena manages media outreach. Soonja Lee provides historical context for guests who want to understand the deeper significance of what they're tasting. David Chen documents everything for potential legal proceedings, but Jae-ho focuses only on the cooking. In his hands, the wooden ladle moves with the same steady rhythm his grandfather used 70 years ago. The broth simmers for 14 hours, developing layers of flavor that can't be rushed or replicated by industrial shortcuts. The kimchi ferments in ceramic crocks, following traditional timing that produces complex, nuanced heat instead of simple spiciness. "This is what authentic tastes like," he murmurs to himself, channeling his grandfather's patient voice. Time, technique, and respect for the ingredients. By 5 p.m., the line stretches around the block. Korean-American families who remember the flavors of their childhoods. Food writers from across the Southeast. Young chefs curious about the controversy. Supporters of justice and detractors convinced he's perpetrating a fraud. Marcus Kim's supporters are there too. A delegation from the Korean American Restaurant Association, several food bloggers known to be sympathetic to established businesses, and at least 2 people Jae-ho suspects are private investigators documenting the event for legal purposes. The first guests enter at 6 p.m. Jae-ho ladles broth into ceramic bowls, his hands steady despite the stakes. Each bowl is accompanied by a small card explaining the dish's history. Bone broth, developed by Park Myung-ho at the Arirang restaurant, Seoul, 1952. Recipe documented in his personal notebook, preserved by his family for 70 years. The reactions are immediate and telling. Older Korean Americans close their eyes as they taste, some nodding with recognition, others fighting back tears. "This tastes like my mother's cooking," one elderly woman whispers. "Like home." Food writers scribble notes frantically, comparing flavors to their experiences at Marcus Kim's restaurants. The differences are subtle but significant. More complex fermentation in the kimchi, richer depth in the broth, spice profiles that suggest patient development rather than mass production shortcuts. But the most powerful moment comes when Young-suk Park, no relation, despite the shared surname, approaches Jae-ho's station. She's 91 years old, a Korean War refugee who has lived in Atlanta since 1958. "I worked at the Arirang restaurant," she says quietly in Korean. "I remember your grandfather. I remember Marcus Kim too, when he was young and eager to learn." The kitchen falls silent. Even the media representatives lean in to hear her words. "Your grandfather was generous with his knowledge," she continues. "He taught anyone who wanted to learn, including Marcus Kim. But Marcus was impatient. He wanted shortcuts, adaptations that would make the food more profitable. Your grandfather believed in preserving authenticity even when it was harder." She tastes the broth, closing her eyes to focus on the flavor. "This is Park Myung-ho's recipe. I would recognize it anywhere. The technique, the timing, the balance. This is exactly how he made it 70 years ago." Her testimony, delivered in front of dozens of witnesses and recorded by multiple cameras, provides unshakable validation of Jae-ho's claims. But more than that, it demonstrates the power of authentic food to carry truth across decades of silence. As the evening progresses, the evidence becomes overwhelming. Guest after guest comments on the difference between these flavors and the Korean food available at established restaurants. Food writers begin composing reviews that praise not just the quality, but the historical significance of the meal. Most importantly, the Korean American community begins to understand what's really at stake. Not just one family's fight for recognition, but the preservation of authentic culinary traditions against corporate appropriation and mass-market dilution. By 9 p.m., when the last guest leaves and the kitchen is cleaned, Jae-ho knows that whatever happens in court, he's already won the most important battle, proving that his grandfather's recipes deserve to be remembered and honored. The success of the community dinner triggers an immediate escalation in media coverage. Marcus Kim's legal team responds within 48 hours by scheduling a competing event, a celebration of Korean American culinary heritage at his flagship restaurant, featuring dishes he claims to have developed during his early career in Seoul. The dueling narratives play out across Atlanta's media landscape like a culinary chess match. Marcus positions himself as the victim of a coordinated attack by opportunistic accusers seeking to profit from ethnic division. Jae-ho emerges as the voice of historical truth and family justice. Food and Wine publishes a detailed comparison of the two chefs' versions of traditional Korean dishes, with side-by-side photos and expert analysis of preparation techniques. The article, titled Tale of Two Recipes: Authenticity versus Innovation in Korean American Cuisine, stops just short of declaring a winner, but provides enough technical detail for knowledgeable readers to draw their own conclusions. Marcus Kim's bulgogi shows clear evidence of American adaptation, the article notes. Increased sweetness, reduced fermentation time, spice profiles modified for Western palates. Park Myong-ho's version, as prepared by his grandson, maintains traditional Korean flavor profiles, with subtle adaptations that preserve authenticity while accommodating available ingredients. The social media battle is less diplomatic. Korean American chefs across the country begin sharing their own stories of working for established restaurants where their innovations were credited to more famous colleagues. The "More Credit the Cook" hashtag evolves into a broader movement challenging power structures within immigrant business communities. Marcus Kim's supporters fight back with their own campaign, emphasizing his decades of contribution to Korean American business success and questioning the motives of people who would destroy a community leader's reputation based on unproven historical claims. The conflict splits families, divides business associations, and forces Korean American community leaders to choose sides in a dispute that cuts to the heart of identity, success, and cultural authenticity. Elena tracks the media coverage with spreadsheet precision, monitoring sentiment analysis across social platforms, traditional media coverage, and community newsletter responses. "We're winning the narrative war," she reports to Jasmine and Jae-ho. But Marcus Kim is winning the institutional support war. The Korean American Chamber of Commerce, the Southeast Asian Restaurant Association, and two Korean cultural organizations have issued statements supporting Marcus Kim and calling for an end to what they term divisive accusations that damage community solidarity. "They're scared," Jasmine observes. Korean American businesses have spent decades building respectability and economic success. They don't want one controversy to undermine everything they've achieved. Even if that success is partly built on lies, especially if that success is partly built on lies. Truth is less important than stability when you're a minority community trying to maintain economic and political influence. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source, Marcus Kim himself. During a live interview on Atlanta's morning show, host Jennifer Walsh asks him to respond directly to the evidence presented in the Atlanta magazine article. "These allegations are baseless," Marcus insists, his composure perfect for television. "I worked alongside Park Myong-ho briefly in Seoul, but the recipes I brought to America were developed through my own innovation and adaptation to American tastes." "What about the recorded interview where you apparently acknowledged learning techniques from Park Myong-ho?" Marcus's expression flickers for just a moment, so briefly that viewers might miss it, but long enough for the cameras to capture a flash of something that looks like panic. "I have no recollection of any such conversation," he says carefully. And even if such a recording exists, it would be taken out of context. All Korean chefs of that era learned from each other. Culinary techniques are collaborative, not proprietary. It's a reasonable response, but the momentary crack in his composure provides exactly what Jae-ho's supporters need. Evidence that Marcus Kim is not as confident in his version of events as he claims to be. Within hours, the clip is viral across social media platforms, analyzed frame by frame by users looking for signs of deception. Body language experts weigh in on Marcus's micro-expressions. Korean American community members debate whether his response demonstrates guilt or simply the stress of defending himself against false accusations. The truth remains contested, but for the first time since the story broke, Marcus Kim appears vulnerable, and vulnerability in a public figure often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The phone call comes at 2:33 a.m. on a Tuesday. Jae-ho's phone buzzes on his nightstand, displaying a number he doesn't recognize. Half asleep, he almost lets it go to voicemail, but something about the persistence of the ringing compels him to answer. Jae-ho Park? Yes. This is Dr. James Kim. I'm calling about my father, Marcus Kim. The words cut through his drowsiness like ice water. Jae-ho sits up in bed, suddenly fully alert. Your father? I need to meet with you. There are things about the Arirang restaurant situation that you need to know. Things my father has never told publicly. They meet 3 hours later at a 24-hour diner in Decatur, far from the media attention and community politics that have consumed Atlanta's Korean American neighborhoods. James Kim is a cardiologist in his early 50s, with his father's precise features but softer eyes that suggest a different relationship with the truth. My father is dying, he says without preamble once they've settled into a corner booth. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And he's been carrying this guilt about your grandfather for 70 years. Jae-ho stares across the Formica table, struggling to process the implications of what he's hearing. Last week, after your community dinner, he called me in tears. Said he couldn't go to his grave knowing he'd buried your grandfather's story. Said the stress of fighting this lawsuit was killing him faster than the cancer. What exactly did he tell you? James withdraws a manila envelope from his briefcase, similar to the one Soonja had carried but thicker, more worn. Everything. The whole story, from his perspective, including things he's never admitted to anyone, not even my mother. The documents paint a devastating picture of ambition, desperation, and moral compromise. Letters Marcus wrote to immigration officials in 1953, systematically undermining Park Myung-ho's application while promoting his own. Copies of recipes he submitted as his original creations. Recipes that match exactly the ones documented in Park Myung-ho's notebook. Most damning of all, a journal entry from 1954, where Marcus explicitly acknowledges that his success in America was built on techniques he learned from Park Myung-ho, and that he intentionally sabotaged his mentor's immigration prospects to eliminate competition. He was 23 years old, James says quietly. Desperate to escape poverty in Seoul, terrified that he'd never get another chance to come to America. He saw your grandfather as an obstacle to his dreams, so he eliminated the obstacle. Why are you showing me this? Because my father wants to confess publicly before he dies. He wants to clear your grandfather's name and acknowledge the truth about how his restaurants were built. James pauses, studying Jae-ho's face. But he also wants something in return. What? He wants your grandfather's story to be told with compassion for a young man who made terrible choices out of desperation. He doesn't want to be remembered as a villain, even though he knows he acted like one. The request hangs in the air between them like smoke. Jae-ho thinks about his grandfather's patient dignity, about 30 years of hoping for justice that never came, about the wooden ladle that carried both recipes and dreams across an ocean. What would this confession look like? A joint press conference. My father acknowledges that he learned fundamental techniques from Park Myung-ho, admits that he interfered with your grandfather's immigration application, and agrees to establish a scholarship fund for Korean American culinary students in Park Myung-ho's name. And the lawsuit? Dropped immediately, with prejudice. No financial settlement required from either side. Jae-ho stares out the diner window at the Atlanta dawn, watching early commuters begin their daily journeys toward dreams and destinations that seemed impossible the night before. "I need to talk to Soonja Lee," he says finally. "And to Jasmine. This isn't just my decision to make. I understand. But don't take too long. My father is fragile. The cancer, the stress of the lawsuit, the weight of carrying this secret for 70 years. He might not have much time left to make this right." As James Kim drives away through the morning traffic, Jae-ho remains in the diner parking lot, holding evidence that could vindicate his grandfather completely, while forcing him to extend forgiveness to the man who stole their family's dreams. The justice he's fought for is finally within reach, but it comes with a price, choosing between revenge and redemption, between condemnation and compassion. Soonja Lee's apartment in Doraville is a shrine to Korean-American history. The walls display photographs from the 1950s, immigration documents, newspaper clippings documenting the growth of Atlanta's Korean community over 7 decades. She serves tea in delicate porcelain cups, while Jae-ho explains James Kim's proposition. "Confession," she says quietly, turning the word over like an unfamiliar ingredient. After 70 years of lies, Marcus Kim wants to confess. His son says the cancer has made him desperate to clear his conscience before he dies. "You believe this desperation is sincere?" Jae-ho hesitates. "I believe James Kim is sincere. Whether his father's remorse is genuine or just fear of dying with this guilt, I don't know." Soonja stands and walks to her kitchen window, which overlooks the Buford Highway corridor, where Korean businesses have flourished for 5 decades. "Your grandfather wrote to me about forgiveness once," she says. This was in 1978, after Marcus Kim had become successful in America, and Park Myung-ho was still cooking in Seoul restaurants that paid him barely enough to survive. She returns with a letter, the paper yellowed and fragile, covered with her grandfather's careful Korean script. He said that forgiveness isn't something you give to someone who deserves it. Forgiveness is something you give to yourself, to stop carrying the weight of other people's sins. She looks up from the letter. "But he also said that forgiveness without justice is just another form of theft. What do you think he would want me to do?" "I think he would want you to consider what serves his memory best. Public vindication that comes with forgiveness, or continued fighting that might lead to complete victory, but could also lead to complete destruction." Before Jae-ho can answer, his phone rings. Jasmine's name appears on the screen. "Turn on channel 11, she says without preamble. Marcus Kim just collapsed during lunch service at his restaurant. He's being taken to the hospital. They crowd around Soonja's small television, watching shaky cell phone footage of paramedics wheeling Marcus Kim out of his flagship restaurant on a stretcher. The news report speculates about stress-related complications from his ongoing legal battle, but the images show a man who looks far older than his 73 years. The confession offer might not be available much longer, Soonja observes. That evening, Jae-ho finds himself in an unexpected place, the waiting room of Emory University Hospital, sitting beside James Kim as they wait for updates on Marcus's condition. "He had another seizure," James explains. "The cancer has spread faster than we expected. The doctors say days, maybe a week. I'm sorry." "Are you?" James's voice is tired but not accusing. "He spent 70 years destroying your family's legacy. It would be natural if you weren't sorry to see him suffer." Jae-ho considers the question honestly. "I'm sorry that anyone has to die carrying that much guilt. I'm sorry that my grandfather died without seeing justice. I'm sorry that your father chose ambition over honor when he was young enough that it shaped his entire life. But you're not sorry he's dying?" "I'm sorry that he's dying without making this right first." James nods. "He wants to see you, if you're willing." The oncology ward smells of antiseptic and resignation. Marcus Kim lies in bed connected to monitors and IV drips, his face gaunt, but his eyes still sharp with the intelligence that built a restaurant empire from stolen recipes and buried guilt. "Park Jae-ho," he says in Korean, his voice barely above a whisper. "You look like him, your grandfather, the same stubborn pride." stubborn enough to fight for the truth. The truth. Marcus closes his eyes. The truth is that I was young and desperate and terrified that I'd never escape poverty. The truth is that your grandfather was generous with his knowledge, and I repaid that generosity with betrayal. The truth is that every successful dish I've served for 70 years was seasoned with stolen recipes and buried shame. He opens his eyes and meets Jae-ho's gaze directly. I want to confess publicly. I want to establish the scholarship fund in your grandfather's name. I want to make whatever restitution is possible before I die. But I also want something from you. What? I want you to tell my story with honesty but not cruelty. I want people to understand that good people can make terrible choices when they're desperate, and that spending 70 years regretting those choices is its own kind of punishment. Jae-ho looks at this dying man who stole his grandfather's dreams and feels something he didn't expect. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Marcus Kim was 23 when he made the choices that defined both their families' futures. Desperate, ambitious, terrified of remaining poor in a country devastated by war. If you confess publicly and acknowledge my grandfather's contributions, I'll make sure your story is told with compassion, Jae-ho says finally. But I won't lie about what you did, and I won't minimize the impact of your choices on my family. Fair enough. Marcus closes his eyes again. James has all the documentation you'll need. We'll schedule the press conference for tomorrow afternoon, if I'm strong enough. If not, he shrugs. Then James will have to read my statement. As Jae-ho walks through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, he realizes that justice and forgiveness aren't opposites. They're different ingredients in the same complex recipe for healing old wounds and building better futures. The press conference takes place at Marcus Kim's flagship restaurant, in the same private dining room where he held his defiant response to the initial allegations 3 weeks earlier. But the atmosphere has changed completely. The man behind the podium is visibly dying, supported by his son and flanked by attorneys who look uncomfortable with their client's decision to abandon all legal defenses. The room is packed with media representatives, Korean American community leaders, and food industry professionals. Jae-ho sits in the front row beside Jasmine, Soon-ja Lee, and Elena Vasquez. The notebook rests in his lap, its leather cover worn smooth by 70 years of handling. Marcus Kim's voice is weak, but clear as he begins to speak. My name is Marcus Kim, and I have built my career on a lie that has haunted me for 70 years. The room goes absolutely silent. In 1952, I worked as an assistant cook at the Arirang restaurant in Seoul, under the supervision of Park Myong-ho, the grandfather of the young man sitting before me today. Park Myong-ho was a master of Korean culinary traditions, who understood how to preserve authentic flavors while adapting them for different palates and circumstances. He pauses, struggling to control his breathing. James Kim steps closer, ready to support his father if needed. I learned everything I knew about Korean cooking from Park Myong-ho. The techniques that made me famous in America, the bone broth preparation, the kimchi fermentation methods, the spice balances that became my signature dishes. All of these were taught to me by a generous mentor who believed in sharing knowledge rather than hoarding it. Another pause. The cameras capture every labored breath, every moment of visible anguish. When Park Myong-ho applied for immigration to America in 1953, I saw him as competition for the opportunities I desperately wanted for myself. I was 23 years old, terrified of remaining poor in war-devastated Korea, convinced that success in America was a zero-sum game where his success would mean my failure. Marcus looks directly at Jae-ho as he continues. I provided false information to immigration officials, claiming that Park Myong-ho had stolen recipes from the restaurant and planned to use them inappropriately in America. These allegations were lies designed to prevent his immigration application from being approved. The admission hits the room like a physical blow. Korean American community leaders who have spent weeks defending Marcus Kim look stunned. Food writers scribble frantically, capturing history in real time. Park Myong-ho's immigration application was denied based on my false testimony. My own application was approved 6 months later. I came to America with stolen knowledge and built my success on techniques that belonged to a better man than I had the courage to be. He withdraws a thick folder from beneath the podium. These documents contain the original recipes I submitted to immigration officials as my own creations, recipes that match exactly the ones documented in Park Myung-ho's personal notebook. They also contain copies of my correspondence with immigration officials, systematically undermining Park Myung-ho's character and credibility. Marcus hands the folder to James, who carries it to Jae-ho. I return these recipes to their rightful owner, along with my public acknowledgement that Park Myung-ho was the creative genius behind the Korean-American culinary innovations that made me wealthy and famous. The confession continues for 20 minutes, with Marcus providing specific details about recipes, techniques, and business practices built on his grandfather's stolen legacy. He announces the establishment of the Park Myung-ho Memorial Scholarship for Korean-American culinary students, funded with $1 million from his estate. I cannot undo 70 years of injustice, he concludes. I cannot restore the opportunities I stole from Park Myung-ho, or give him the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. But I can finally tell the truth, and I can ask his grandson for something I don't deserve but desperately need: forgiveness. The room waits as Jae-ho rises from his chair, carrying the notebook that started everything. He approaches the podium, his grandfather's wooden ladle visible in his jacket pocket. My grandfather died believing that truth matters more than success, that authenticity matters more than profit, that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. His voice is steady, carrying the weight of 7 decades of family history. Marcus Kim stole my grandfather's recipes, sabotaged his dreams, and built an empire on buried lies. But today, he has returned something more valuable than recipes. He has returned my grandfather's honor. Jae-ho looks directly at Marcus, who is visibly struggling to remain upright. I don't forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because my grandfather would have wanted his legacy to be about healing rather than hatred, about building bridges rather than maintaining walls. He opens the notebook to the first page, where his grandfather's careful Korean script documents the first recipe developed at the Arirang restaurant. These recipes will be used to build the business my grandfather never got to create. They'll be credited properly, honored completely, and shared generously with anyone who wants to learn authentic Korean culinary traditions. As the press conference ends and the room erupts with questions and camera flashes, Jae-ho realizes that justice has finally arrived, not in the form of victory over an enemy, but in the form of truth acknowledged and honor restored. 6 months later, Jae-ho stands in the kitchen of his first restaurant, a modest space in East Atlanta that specializes in what the menu calls Park Myung-ho's traditional Korean comfort food. The walls display his grandfather's story in both Korean and English, with photographs from the Arirang restaurant, copies of the original recipe notebook, and testimonials from Soonja Lee and other Korean immigrants who remember the authentic flavors of their youth. The wooden ladle hangs in a place of honor behind the main cooking station, no longer just a family heirloom but a symbol of culinary integrity and historical truth. Every bowl of bone broth served carries a small card explaining its origins. Recipe developed by Park Myung-ho, Seoul, 1952, preserved by his family and shared with love and respect for authentic Korean culinary traditions. How does it feel? Jasmine asks, joining him in the kitchen during the dinner rush. She's become more than a business partner in the months since Marcus Kim's confession. She's become the bridge between Jae-ho's dreams and their practical realization. Different than I expected, he admits, ladling broth with the same careful precision his grandfather taught him. I thought justice would feel more complete, but mostly it feels like responsibility. Responsibility? To honor his legacy correctly. To make sure this restaurant succeeds not just financially but authentically. To prove that truth and profit can coexist without compromising either. The restaurant has been successful beyond their initial projections. The media attention from Marcus Kim's confession brought curious diners, but it's the food quality and authentic preparation that has created a loyal customer base. Korean-American families drive from across the Southeast to taste flavors that remind them of childhood. Food writers praise the restaurant's commitment to traditional techniques in an industry increasingly dominated by fusion adaptations and mass production shortcuts. Most importantly, the restaurant has become a gathering place for conversations about Korean American history, cultural preservation, and the complex relationship between authenticity and adaptation in immigrant communities. Marcus Kim died last week, Jasmine says quietly, as they work side by side. I heard. James called me. How do you feel about that? Jae-ho considers the question while stirring a pot of kimchi stew. Sad that he spent 70 years carrying guilt that could have been resolved much earlier. Grateful that he found the courage to tell the truth before he died. Hopeful that his confession will make it easier for other people to acknowledge difficult truths about cultural appropriation and business ethics. And relieved? And relieved that my grandfather's story is finally complete. The evening rush continues with the controlled chaos of a successful restaurant. Servers carry steaming bowls to tables filled with families, couples, and solo diners seeking comfort in authentic flavors. The kitchen hums with the efficient rhythm of cooks who understand both the techniques they're using and the history behind them. Elena Vasquez arrives during the dinner break, carrying a folder of newspaper clippings and online reviews. The Park Myung-ho Scholarship Program has received applications from 43 Korean American culinary students. Food and Wine has nominated the restaurant for a James Beard Award in the category of Outstanding New Restaurant. Most significantly, 2 other Korean American chefs have come forward with their own stories of recipe appropriation and cultural theft, citing Jae-ho's courage as inspiration for their own decisions to speak truth publicly. You've started something bigger than you realize, Elena tells him. This isn't just about your family's story anymore. It's about changing how the food industry handles questions of cultural authenticity and creative credit. Soonja Lee joins them for dinner after the kitchen closes, settling into her usual booth with the dignity of someone who has finally seen justice served. She tastes the bone broth with the careful attention of a critic who remembers exactly how it's supposed to taste. Perfect, she pronounces. This is exactly how your grandfather made it 70 years ago. The same patience, the same respect for the ingredients, the same understanding that good food requires both skill and love. What do you think he would say about all of this? Jae-ho asks. I think he would say that truth has its own timeline, and that the most important victories are the ones that create better opportunities for the next generation. She gestures around the dining room, where Korean American families share meals at tables surrounded by photographs of their cultural history. This restaurant isn't just serving food, it's preserving memory and passing it forward to people who might otherwise forget where their favorite dishes really came from. As the evening winds down and the last customers leave, Jae-ho remains in the kitchen, cleaning the wooden ladle with the same careful attention his grandfather showed 7 decades earlier. Through the pass-through window, he can see Jasmine reviewing the day's receipts, Soonja Lee reading a Korean-language newspaper at her favorite booth, Elena updating the restaurant's social media presence with photographs of satisfied customers. The notebook sits open on the prep counter, displaying his grandfather's careful documentation of the bone broth recipe that started everything. But now it's surrounded by new notebooks, Jae-ho's own documentation of adaptations and innovations, Elena's records of customer preferences and dietary restrictions, Jasmine's business plans for expansion and franchise opportunities. The story that began with theft and injustice has become a story about restoration and hope, proving that authenticity and success can coexist when truth is honored and credit is given where credit is due. 1 year after opening, the restaurant faces its biggest test, a visit from the Korean American Chamber of Commerce, the same organization that initially supported Marcus Kim during the controversy. The delegation includes business leaders who defended Marcus against what they called unproven historical allegations, along with younger Korean American entrepreneurs who supported Jae-ho's fight for his grandfather's recognition. This is about more than one restaurant review, Jasmine warns as they prepare for the visit. This is about whether the Korean American business community is ready to embrace accountability and authenticity as core values, or whether they'll continue prioritizing economic success over historical truth. The delegation arrives at 11 a.m. for what's scheduled as a private tasting and community discussion. Jae-ho prepares the same menu he served at the church community dinner 18 months earlier. Bone broth, kimchi, bulgogi, all prepared according to Park Myung-ho's original recipes and techniques. The conversation that follows is tense but respectful. Several older business leaders acknowledge that they were wrong to dismiss Jae-ho's allegations without proper investigation. They admit that their initial support for Marcus Kim was based more on protecting Korean-American business reputation than on evaluating evidence or seeking truth. "We made a mistake," says Dr. Sarah Cho, president of the Chamber of Commerce. "We prioritized community solidarity over justice, and in doing so, we became complicit in perpetuating an injustice that should have been corrected decades ago." But the visit also reveals ongoing tensions within the community. Some members remain uncomfortable with what they see as public criticism of Korean-American success stories, even when that criticism is factually accurate. They worry that highlighting cultural appropriation within the community will provide ammunition for outsiders who want to diminish Korean-American business achievements generally. "Change is always uncomfortable," Soonja Lee observes during the discussion. But the discomfort of acknowledging difficult truths is nothing compared to the damage caused by perpetuating comfortable lies. The breakthrough comes when Young-suk Park, the 91-year-old former Arirang restaurant worker who provided testimony at the community dinner, addresses the delegation directly. "I have lived in America for 67 years, she says in Korean, with Soonja translating for English speakers. "I have watched our community build successful businesses, create opportunities for our children, establish respect in American society. These are achievements we should celebrate." She pauses, looking around the room at faces that represent 3 generations of Korean-American business leadership. But success built on lies is not real success. Honor earned through theft is not real honor. If we cannot acknowledge when our leaders have made mistakes, how can we teach our children to make better choices? Her words carry the weight of lived experience and moral authority that transcends generational and political divisions. The room falls silent as community members grapple with the implications of what she's saying. The visit concludes with the Chamber of Commerce issuing a formal statement acknowledging the historical accuracy of Jae-ho's claims about his grandfather's contributions to Korean-American culinary development. They also announced the creation of a Korean-American Culinary Heritage Project, dedicated to documenting authentic food traditions and ensuring proper credit for cultural innovations. This represents a fundamental shift in how our community handles accountability. Dr. Cho explains to the gathered media representatives, "We're committed to supporting businesses that honor authentic Korean culinary traditions while also acknowledging when past practices have fallen short of our values." That evening, as Jae-ho closes the restaurant after another successful service, he finds himself reflecting on how much has changed since that rainy afternoon at Piedmont Park, when a black woman in a navy blazer tasted his grandfather's broth and asked 3 simple questions. His work visa has been approved for permanent residency. The restaurant is profitable and expanding, with plans for a second location in Nashville and a third in Charlotte. More importantly, the story of Park Myung-ho has inspired other Korean-American families to document and share their own culinary histories before they're lost to time and assimilation. Jasmine finds him in the kitchen, methodically cleaning the wooden ladle that has become the restaurant's unofficial symbol. "Tomorrow's reservation book is completely full," she reports. "We have a waiting list for next month, and 3 different food magazines want to do feature stories." "Success," he says simply. "Hard-earned success, built on truth, sustained by authenticity, shared with generosity." She leans against the prep counter, watching him work. "Your grandfather would be proud. He would be surprised. I don't think he ever imagined his notebook would become the foundation for all of this." Jae-ho gestures around the kitchen, where photographs of Park Myung-ho share wall space with James Beard Award nominations and glowing restaurant reviews. What do you think he imagined? Recognition, credit for his work, the chance to see his recipes appreciated by people who understood their cultural significance. Jae-ho sets the ladle in its place of honor behind the cooking station. Maybe the knowledge that his legacy would continue through his family, even if he never got to see America himself. He got all of that, just not in the way he expected. As they lock up the restaurant and walk through the quiet Atlanta evening toward their respective homes, Jae-ho carries with him the satisfaction of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. Not his own dreams. He never imagined owning a successful restaurant or becoming a voice for Korean-American culinary authenticity. But his grandfather's dreams, realized through persistence, truth-telling, and the kind of patient justice that spans generations. The wooden ladle that once stirred soup in a Seoul restaurant now stirs broth in an Atlanta kitchen, carrying flavors and memories across 7 decades of separation to finally find their proper home, in a story where authenticity triumphs over appropriation and truth proves stronger than convenient lies. 2 years after the restaurant's opening, Jae-ho stands before a classroom of 23 Korean-American culinary students, all recipients of the Park Myung-ho Memorial Scholarship. The program has expanded beyond its original scope, offering not just financial assistance, but mentorship, business training, and comprehensive education in Korean culinary history and authentic preparation techniques. Cooking is storytelling, he tells them, demonstrating the proper way to prepare bone broth using his grandfather's 70-year-old method. Every dish carries history, culture, family memory, and personal innovation. Your job as chefs is to honor that history while adding your own chapter to the story. The students are diverse in age and background. Recent culinary school graduates, career changers, home cooks seeking professional training, second-generation Korean Americans reconnecting with their cultural heritage. What unites them is a commitment to authenticity and an understanding that food can be both commercially successful and culturally respectful. What makes a recipe authentic? Asks Jennifer Park, a 24-year-old graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, who plans to open a Korean bakery specializing in traditional pastries, adapted for American ingredients and dietary preferences. It's the question that has driven Jae-ho's entire journey, from that moment in Marcus Kim's kitchen, when he first showed his grandfather's notebook, to this classroom where he's training the next generation of Korean-American food entrepreneurs. Authenticity isn't about rigid adherence to historical methods, he explains, adding aromatic vegetables to the simmering stock. It's about understanding why those methods developed, what they accomplished, and how to preserve their essential character while adapting to new circumstances. He pauses, thinking about his grandfather's careful balance between tradition and innovation, between Korean authenticity and American adaptation. My grandfather modified kimchi fermentation for American soldiers' palates, but he did it to share Korean flavors with people who might otherwise never experience them. Marcus Kim modified the same techniques to maximize profit and minimize preparation time. Same techniques, different motivations, completely different results. So, authenticity is about intention? Asks David Lee, a 52-year-old banker who left finance to pursue his dream of opening a Korean barbecue restaurant that honors his family's regional cooking traditions. Authenticity is about honesty. Honest about your ingredients, honest about your techniques, honest about your cultural knowledge, honest about your business motivations. Jae-ho tastes the developing broth, adjusting seasoning with the practiced precision of someone who has made this dish thousands of times. If you're adapting traditional recipes to appeal to broader markets, acknowledge that adaptation. If you're learning techniques from other chefs, credit their contributions. If you're building on family traditions, honor the people who preserved those traditions for you to inherit. The cooking lesson continues for 3 hours, with students learning not just technique, but history. Not just recipes, but cultural context. They document their learning in notebooks similar to Park Myung-ho's, creating their own record of innovation and adaptation for future generations to study and build upon. Elena Vasquez, now general manager of the scholarship program, arrives during the final hour with news that will reshape the entire initiative. The James Beard Foundation wants to partner with us on a national Korean-American culinary heritage project, she announces to the class. They're proposing a traveling exhibition, cookbook project, and documentary series highlighting authentic Korean food traditions and the families who have preserved them in America. The students erupt in excited conversation, understanding immediately that this partnership could amplify their individual businesses while educating American diners about authentic Korean food culture. But Jae-ho feels a familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "This is what your grandfather's confession made possible," Jasmine tells him that evening as they review the James Beard Foundation proposal in the restaurant's office. National recognition for Korean American culinary authenticity, with proper credit and historical context. It's also a lot of pressure. If we accept this partnership, we become the public face of Korean American food culture. Everything we do gets scrutinized, criticized, held up as representative of an entire community's values and standards. Is that different from what you're already doing? Jae-ho considers the question while reviewing applications from Korean American chefs who want to participate in the scholarship program. Each application tells a story of cultural preservation, family legacy, and dreams of building businesses that honor their heritage while succeeding in competitive American markets. "The difference is scale," he says finally. "Right now, I'm responsible for honoring my grandfather's legacy and training the next generation of Korean American chefs. If we accept this partnership, I become responsible for representing Korean American food culture to the entire country. And I'm not sure I'm qualified for that responsibility. I'm one person with one family's story." Korean American food culture is incredibly diverse, reflecting different regions, different generations, different approaches to balancing tradition with innovation. Jasmine pulls up the scholarship program's website, which features profiles of current recipients and their diverse culinary projects. Korean-Mexican fusion in Los Angeles, traditional temple food in New York, modern interpretations of North Korean recipes preserved by refugee families, vegan versions of classic dishes adapted for contemporary dietary preferences. "Look at this," she says. "You're not representing Korean American food culture. You're creating space for Korean American food culture to represent itself. There's a difference." The insight feels like permission to embrace the opportunity without claiming expertise he doesn't possess. The James Beard Partnership could provide a platform for dozens of Korean American chefs to tell their own stories, share their own innovations, and demonstrate the rich diversity of authentic Korean food traditions in America. "We say yes," he decides, "but we structure it so that I'm not the spokesperson for Korean American culinary culture. I'm the coordinator who helps other people tell their own stories authentically and completely." As they begin planning for a national platform that will share Korean American food stories with millions of Americans, Jae-ho realizes that his grandfather's legacy has grown beyond individual justice into a movement for cultural authenticity and proper recognition throughout the American food industry. 3 years after the first community dinner, Jae-ho stands on the rooftop garden of his expanded restaurant, watching the Atlanta skyline emerge from morning mist. Tomatoes, Korean peppers, and perilla plants grow in raised beds that supply fresh ingredients for the kitchen below. The wooden ladle hangs in a glass case near the garden entrance, protected from weather, but visible to anyone who wants to understand the story behind the restaurant's success. The business has evolved far beyond his original vision. 2 additional locations serve authentic Korean comfort food to communities across the Southeast. The scholarship program has trained 47 Korean American chefs who now run their own successful restaurants, food trucks, and catering businesses. The James Beard Partnership has produced a documentary series that won a James Beard Media Award for Excellence in Food Journalism. Most importantly, the conversation about cultural appropriation and proper credit in the food industry has expanded beyond Korean American restaurants to encompass broader questions of authenticity, exploitation, and justice in how immigrant food traditions are commercialized in America. The inspection report came back perfect, Elena announces as she joins him on the rooftop. Health department, fire safety, business licensing, everything approved for the new Nashville location. She pauses, studying his expression. "You don't look as happy as someone whose business just got cleared for expansion." "I'm thinking about my grandfather," he admits. "Whether he would recognize what his recipes have become. Whether he would approve of turning his notebook into a national movement. What do you think he would say?" Jae-ho touches the glass case containing the wooden ladle, remembering his grandfather's careful hands stirring broth in their cramped Seoul apartment. I think he would say that recipes are meant to be shared, but stories are meant to be told truthfully. As long as we're doing both, we're honoring his legacy. The morning prep shift begins in the kitchen below, and the familiar sounds of professional cooking drift up through the garden. Pans heating on burners, the gentle bubbling of broth that has simmered since yesterday evening. The same sounds his grandfather knew in the Arirang restaurant 70 years ago, carried forward through time and migration to find their proper home in American soil. Jasmine arrives for their weekly business meeting, carrying financial reports that show steady growth across all locations and programs. But more than numbers, she brings stories. Thank you letters from scholarship recipients, reviews from food critics praising authentic Korean flavors, messages from Korean American families who finally feel their culinary heritage is properly represented in American restaurants. Soon-ja Lee called this morning, Jasmine reports as they settle into the garden's small seating area. She wants to expand the oral history project to include Korean American families in other cities. Document their food stories before the older generation passes away and the knowledge is lost. How many cities? 12 initially. Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Houston, anywhere there's been significant Korean American immigration and restaurant development. The goal is to create a comprehensive archive of authentic Korean American food culture, preserved in the family's own words. The project represents the next evolution of what began with Park Myung-ho's notebook, from individual justice to community preservation, from personal vindication to cultural documentation. But it also represents a responsibility that feels both honored and overwhelming. We're not just running restaurants anymore, Jae-ho observes. We're becoming the keepers of Korean American culinary memory. Is that a problem? He considers the question while watching kitchen staff prepare for the lunch rush 3 floors below. Young Korean American cooks working alongside Latino prep cooks and African American servers, creating a truly integrated kitchen where cultural knowledge flows in all directions. This is what his grandfather envisioned. Korean flavors shared generously, adapted thoughtfully, credited properly. It's a responsibility I never expected to have, he says finally. But maybe that's what makes it authentic. My grandfather never expected to become the keeper of Korean culinary knowledge for American soldiers in Seoul. He just cooked the best food he could and shared it with people who were hungry for something that tasted like home. And that's exactly what you're doing. The lunch service begins with the controlled urgency of a successful restaurant. Orders flow from servers to kitchen. Dishes emerge from the pass with practiced precision. Customers fill tables with the diverse mix that has become the restaurant's signature. Korean American families reconnecting with childhood flavors, food enthusiasts seeking authentic cuisine, young professionals discovering Korean comfort food, elderly immigrants tasting recipes that remind them of mothers and grandmothers long gone. At 2 p.m., during the afternoon lull, Jae-ho receives a call that will define the final chapter of his grandfather's story. The caller identifies himself as Professor Kim Jin-woo from Seoul National University's Department of Korean Cultural Studies. His English is precise, academic, tinged with the formality that Korean professors bring to international conversations. Mr. Park, I am calling because we have discovered something at the university that belongs to your family, he begins. We are conducting an oral history project, documenting Korean War-era restaurants, and we found recordings of your grandfather that were donated to our archives in 1985. Jae-ho's hand tightens on the phone. What kind of recordings? Interview sessions conducted by the Korean American Heritage Society, documenting immigrant experiences for future research. Your grandfather participated in 1983 and 1984, shortly before his death. He spoke extensively about his experiences at the Arirang restaurant, his relationship with Marcus Kim, and his hope that someday his recipes would be properly credited in America. The professor pauses, and Jae-ho can hear papers rustling in the background. Mr. Park, your grandfather's final interview session includes a message specifically addressed to his family in America. He seemed to know that his story would eventually become important, and he wanted to leave guidance for whoever would continue his legacy. Can you send me copies of the recordings? Better than that, the Korean American Heritage Society wants to donate the original recordings to your restaurant's cultural preservation project. but they have requested that the donation ceremony take place in Seoul, at the site of the original Arirang restaurant. The invitation feels like destiny completing its circle. 3 weeks later, Jae-ho stands in the Yongsan district of Seoul, where his grandfather stirred bone broth for American soldiers 7 decades earlier. The Arirang restaurant building still exists, now housing a small museum dedicated to Korean War-era cultural exchange. Soon-ja Lee has flown from Atlanta to witness this moment. Elena Vasquez documents everything for the James Beard Foundation archive. Professor Kim leads them through the museum's exhibits, showing photographs of the original restaurant, menus from the 1950s, and testimonials from Korean cooks who worked to bridge cultural differences through food. "Your grandfather's station was here," Professor Kim explains, pointing to a restored section of the original kitchen. This is where he developed the bone broth recipe that became famous in American Korean restaurants. The wooden cutting board shows knife marks from decades of use. The gas burner has been restored to working condition. Most remarkably, a large stock pot sits in exactly the position where Park Myung-ho would have stirred his slow-simmered broths. "We would like you to cook," Professor Kim says, "using your grandfather's recipe, in his original workspace, with his techniques preserved exactly as he documented them. It will be the final piece of our oral history project, the recipe returning to its birthplace." Jae-ho unpacks the wooden ladle from his carefully padded luggage. In this Seoul kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of American soldiers and Korean cooks who once shared meals across cultural divides, he begins the 14-hour process of making bone broth exactly as his grandfather taught him. The ingredients come from the same markets his grandfather would have used: Namdaemun for bones, Dongdaemun for vegetables, specialty shops in Myeongdong for the precise spices that create authentic Korean flavor profiles. But the technique comes from memory, from muscle memory passed down through generations of careful teaching and patient practice. As the broth simmers, Professor Kim plays the recordings of Park Myung-ho's final interviews. His grandfather's voice fills the kitchen. Older, frailer than Jae-ho remembers, but unmistakably the same man who taught him to cook with patience and respect for ingredients. "I hope my recipes will someday feed people who are hungry for more than food," his grandfather's recorded voice says in Korean. "I hope they will feed people who are hungry for connection, for understanding, for the kind of bridge building that happens when strangers share a meal together." The recording continues with his grandfather's detailed description of each recipe, his philosophy of adaptation versus authenticity, and his dreams for how Korean food might be received in America if it were presented with proper context and cultural respect. But the final recording session contains the message addressed specifically to his American family. "To whoever carries my recipes forward, remember that cooking is not just technique, it is love made visible." The ladle in your hands has stirred soup for soldiers far from home, for families celebrating festivals, for strangers who needed comfort. Cook with that history in your heart. Share these flavors generously, but honestly. Make sure the story travels with the food, so people understand what they are tasting and why it matters. His grandfather's voice grows softer, more reflective. "I never made it to America, but my recipes will. Through them, I will feed people I will never meet, in places I will never see. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is immortality." As the recording ends and the bone broth reaches perfect doneness, Jae-ho understands that his grandfather's story was never about individual recognition or commercial success. It was about the enduring power of authentic food to create connections across time, culture, and geography. The Seoul cooking demonstration attracts Korean-American chefs from across Asia and representatives from the U.S. Embassy's Cultural Exchange Program. But the most meaningful witness is an elderly Korean woman who approaches as Jae-ho serves the finished broth in ceramic bowls, identical to those used at the original Arirang restaurant. "I remember this flavor," she says in Korean, tears streaming down her face. "My husband was a cook here in 1953. He learned this recipe from Park Myung-ho and taught it to me before he died. I haven't tasted it properly prepared in 40 years. Her testimony provides the final piece of documentation, proving Park Myung-ho's influence on Korean-American culinary development. But more than evidence, it provides closure. the knowledge that his grandfather's recipes have continued to nourish people across continents and generations, exactly as he intended. The ceremony concludes with the formal donation of Park Myung-ho's recorded interviews to the restaurant's Cultural Preservation Archive. Professor Kim presents Jae-ho with the original tapes, along with professionally produced transcriptions in both Korean and English. These recordings will ensure that your grandfather's story is preserved accurately for future generations, Professor Kim explains. But more importantly, they will serve as a model for how immigrant food traditions should be documented and credited. Flying back to Atlanta, Jae-ho carries more than recordings and transcriptions. He carries the weight of completed responsibility, the satisfaction of promises kept, and the knowledge that his grandfather's legacy has been restored, not just to his family, but to history itself. The plane descends through Georgia clouds toward the city where his grandfather's recipes found their American home. Below, the lights of Atlanta spread like stars, marking neighborhoods where Korean-American families gather around dinner tables, sharing food that tastes like memory and feels like belonging. Jasmine meets him at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, along with Elena and the core team that has built the restaurant empire around Park Myung-ho's authentic recipes. But the homecoming feels different from previous business trips, less like returning to work, more like completing a pilgrimage. How was Seoul? Jasmine asks as they drive through the city toward East Atlanta, where the original restaurant continues serving customers who have become more like family than clientele. Perfect, he says simply. Everything came full circle. The recipes returned to their birthplace. The story was told completely. The legacy was preserved properly. He pauses, watching familiar Atlanta neighborhoods pass outside the car windows. My grandfather's work is finally finished. Your grandfather's work, Elena corrects from the passenger seat. But your work is just beginning. She's right, of course. The restaurants, the scholarship program, the cultural preservation project, the national partnership with the James Beard Foundation, all of these represent ongoing commitments that will require years of careful attention to maintain their authenticity and effectiveness. But as they pull into the restaurant's parking lot, Jae-ho realizes that the nature of his work has fundamentally changed. For 3 years, he has been fighting to restore his grandfather's reputation and validate his family's legacy. Now, he is simply living that legacy, sharing it generously, and ensuring that it continues to nourish people who are hungry for more than food. The restaurant glows warm against the Atlanta evening, its windows revealing customers lingering over meals, servers moving with practiced efficiency, cooks in the open kitchen stirring pots with the same careful attention Park Myung-ho brought to his work 70 years earlier. The wooden ladle that started this entire journey hangs in its place of honor, no longer just a family heirloom, but a symbol of truth, acknowledged, justice served, and authentic flavors shared with love across generations and cultures. 5 years after the first community dinner, Jae-ho Park stands before a congressional subcommittee investigating cultural appropriation in the American food industry. The hearing room is packed with food industry representatives, immigrant rights advocates, and media covering what has become a landmark case for intellectual property protection and cultural authenticity. The question before us today, says Congresswoman Sarah Martinez, chair of the subcommittee, is whether current American business law adequately protects immigrant food traditions from commercial exploitation, and whether cultural authenticity should be a factor in trademark and intellectual property decisions. Jae-ho's testimony draws on 5 years of experience building authentic Korean-American restaurants while fighting against cultural appropriation and recipe theft. But his words carry weight beyond personal experience. They represent the voices of dozens of immigrant families whose food traditions have been documented through the Cultural Preservation Project. Traditional recipes are not just commercial products, he tells the subcommittee. They are cultural heritage, family legacy, community identity. When corporations appropriate these recipes without acknowledging their origins, they are stealing more than ingredients and techniques. They are stealing history, memory, and the right of immigrant communities to tell their own stories. The hearing includes testimony from Marcus Kim's son James, now a vocal advocate for transparency and cultural attribution in the restaurant industry. It includes Soon-ja Lee, whose documentation and witness testimony have become the gold standard for proving historical claims about recipe development. It includes Elena Vasquez, whose research methodology is being adopted by universities studying immigrant food traditions. Most powerfully, it includes testimony from 47 Korean-American chefs trained through the Park Myung-ho Memorial Scholarship Program, each running successful businesses built on authentic cultural traditions properly credited and respectfully shared. The American food industry is stronger when it embraces authenticity rather than appropriation, Jae-ho concludes. When immigrant food traditions are properly credited, everyone benefits. Consumers get authentic flavors with cultural context, immigrant communities get economic recognition for their contributions, and American culinary culture becomes richer and more honest. The subcommittee's final report recommends changes to federal trademark law that would require cultural attribution for traditional recipes used in commercial settings. It also recommends funding for programs that document immigrant food traditions before they are lost to assimilation or exploitation. But beyond legal and policy changes, the hearing represents something more significant: national recognition that food justice is cultural justice, and that immigrant communities deserve protection for their culinary heritage, just as they deserve protection for their labor and civil rights. The hearing concludes at sunset, and Jae-ho walks through the Capitol grounds toward Union Station, where he will catch a flight back to Atlanta. His phone buzzes with messages from scholarship recipients, restaurant customers, and Korean-American community leaders celebrating the day's testimony. But the message that matters most comes from the Korean-American Heritage Society in Seoul. They have received funding to expand the Oral History Project to immigrant communities in 12 countries, documenting Korean food traditions around the world before they are lost to time and displacement. Park Myung-ho's notebook, which began as one family's private record of recipes and memories, has become the foundation for a global movement to preserve and protect immigrant culinary heritage. The wooden ladle that once stirred soup in a Seoul restaurant now represents the principle that authentic food traditions deserve respect, recognition, and protection under law. As Jae-ho's plane rises above the Potomac River toward the Georgia sky, he opens his grandfather's notebook one final time. The pages are more fragile now, the ink faded, but still legible. The Korean characters still carrying their careful record of recipes, developed with patience, shared with generosity, and preserved with hope. On the inside back cover, in his grandfather's careful handwriting, he finds words he has never noticed before. Sarami meonjo, people before rules. Adam. It is the philosophy that guided Park Myung-ho through war and displacement, through friendship and betrayal, through decades of hoping for justice that seemed unlikely to arrive. It is the philosophy that guided Jae-ho through his decision to tell the truth, even when lies would have been more profitable, to fight for recognition even when silence would have been safer. As the plane descends toward Atlanta and the restaurants where his grandfather's recipes continue feeding people hungry for authentic connection, Jae-ho understands that the most important ingredient in any recipe is not technique or timing, but love. Love for the people who will taste your food, love for the traditions that shaped your knowledge, and love for the truth that makes all flavors more meaningful. The wooden ladle waits in its place of honor, ready for tomorrow's service, and the generations of cooks who will carry forward the lesson that authentic food, properly shared and honestly credited, has the power to heal old wounds and build bridges between cultures, families, and hearts. People before rules. Always. What recipe has been passed down through your family, carrying flavors that taste like home and stories that deserve to be preserved? If this tale of culinary justice and cultural authenticity resonated with you, share your own food stories and help us build a community where every family's traditions are honored. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the authentic flavors behind America's diverse culinary landscape.